So I wanted to redo my video tutorial on duplicate stitch because as I've been doing duplicate stitch more, I've learned a couple of things that I felt were important to share, which I'll explain a bit further on in the video. So duplicate stitch is really handy when you want to embroider a design onto your knitting in a contrasting colour. So here I'm knitting a pony and I'm using duplicate stitch to add the muzzle onto his face. So it's really easy. First of all, you want to come in at the bottom of the stitch that you want to embroider. So I want to embroider this stitch here, and my yarn is already in position at the bottom of that stitch. The next thing we need to do is we go underneath both legs of the stitch or the V above it, and we pull the yarn through. Now we want to come back in where we started, into that same hole where we first started, and then we want to come back out again at the bottom of the next stitch. There we go. Check our tension and make sure it's nice and neat. Okay, now we go underneath both legs of the V or the stitch above it. Pull the yarn through. Then we want to go back into the same hole that we first came out of, and then back out again at the bottom of the next V. Check our tension. Again, underneath both legs of the stitch above, pull the yarn through, back in through that same hole, back out again at the next stitch that we want to embroider. Check our tension. Okay, so it's super easy. Now it's important that we always work from the bottom to the top, and it's also very important that we work from the right to the left, and this is something that a lot of tutorials don't explain, including my first tutorial. And it's really important, and I'll explain why. Because say for example we move across and we want to do a stitch on the right, what ends up happening is when we go underneath the legs of the stitch up here, what we've done is we've created like a loop, and that yarn crosses over. And what that tends to do is create the look of a twisted knit stitch. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that very well, but see how it's kind of created the look of a twisted knit stitch, and that's because the yarn has created this loop. But say for example, for whatever reason, we need to go back and do a stitch on the right, you can still do that. And I'll show you what you can do to avoid that twist. So let's just say we need to do this stitch here to the right. Instead of going under the legs of the stitch above it from the right to the left, like this, we need to come in from the other direction, okay? And then that will stop the yarn from crossing over itself and creating that twisted look. The only thing I'll say is that it doesn't feel very natural to do it that way, but maybe if you're left-handed, for example, you might prefer to do it that way anyway. So either way is fine, so long as you go through the stitch above it the same direction that you're moving. So hopefully that makes sense and I haven't confused you too much, but I found once I had figured that out, my duplicate stitch became a lot neater and I didn't get these little twists happening. So that's how you do duplicate stitch, and I hope you found those couple of tips helpful. Duplicate stitch is also a really great alternative to intarsia knitting, especially because my toys are knitted in the round. You can't actually do intarsia when working in the round, so duplicate stitch is a really great alternative.